Sure, and I think, my family's example or what my family has been through is the same story that hundreds of families have been through in Bahrain. And in some cases, our story is not even as bad as some other stories of what people have been through. My father is a longtime human rights defender. He's been a human rights defender most of his life. And he was arrested from my sister's home on April 9th, 2011. I believe it was April 9th. And he was beaten unconscious in front of my mother and sisters. My two brothers-in-law were arrested along with him just before being related to the family. They're not actually activists. And after he was arrested, he went missing. He was unconscious when they took him. And we feared for the first several days when we had no contact with him, we feared of whether he was even alive or dead. Of course, now we know that he had 4 fractures in his face. He was severely tortured after he was arrested, even at a time when he was still recovering from a 4-hour surgery of replacing or putting back his jaw together back with his face. They still tortured him in the military hospital during the time when he was supposed to be recovering. And then he was moved to the military hospital where he was also tortured. And like I said, this is the story of hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people in Bahrain who were arrested and tortured for merely coming out and asking for basic human rights. And this is what Bahrain is. It's an absolute oppressive monarchy where if you dare to come out and demand basic human rights, you could be taken to prison, you could be tortured, and in some cases even killed. Karim Fakhrawi is one of the people who actually took up the government on their offer. The government said, or the regime said, if you were subjected to any violations, come and make a complaint. And he did. He went to make a complaint that his house was raided and some of his belongings were stolen. And he was tortured to death. His family then received his tortured body from the police a few days later after his arrest.
So why don't you go back to Bahrain?
As far as I know, there's a warrant for my arrest in Bahrain. When I was trying to get into Egypt a few months ago, I was told that I was denied entry, of course, and I was told that I'm a threat to national security in Egypt, and that if I don't leave by choice, which I was refusing to do until they give me a real reason of why I was being denied entry, they said if I refused to leave voluntarily, that they would send me to Bahrain despite me traveling on my Danish passport, where they said that there's an outstanding warrant for my arrest.
And it's not the first time I interview you. I've interviewed you when I worked at Al Jazeera. I've been following your story. The one thing that really strikes me is how you're able to speak in such a pragmatic kind of calm way about something that's obviously personally and professionally really troubling and difficult and challenging. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I've always wondered, and I've never asked you, so what better time than now? How are you keeping it together?
I think, there's many different things that you need to do to keep it together. I recently recently a book was published called Demanding Dignity, which I contributed to, in which I explained part of that, of dealing with the physical, psychological, and emotional issues that a lot of activists go through when dealing with cases that sometimes are very personal. And one of the things that I do is when I work on the cases of my father, of my sister, of other people that I personally know in Bahrain, like Nabil Rajab, I don't deal with them as being personal cases. I deal with them just like I would deal with the thousands and thousands of other cases. And to some extent, it's not just because I need to be emotionally removed from these cases, but I also know that I have no right to prioritize personal cases over other cases. If there's a case where someone is being tortured, and I know that my father currently is not being tortured in prison, then I give priority to the case of the person being tortured. Because as a human rights defender, that's what I have to do.
So I want to actually play a video clip if we can. This is a video clip that's actually, I think, over a year old now. This is at the very beginning of the uprisings when you were actually in Bahrain. It's actually taken from Al Jazeera's documentary, Shouting in the Dark. Let's play that clip.
In Manama, police opened fire on a vastly expanding protest to corral protesters back into Pearl Roundabout. The capital was in chaos.
Now, Maryam, since then, those images have been shared and circulated online, and they've been brought to the attention of America's government and many other Western governments. You've met with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. You've met with a lot of European leaders. And yet it seems there hasn't really been a shift in policy when it comes to Bahrain. The U.S. still sells weapons to Bahrain. Why do you think there has been no shift?
I think, given Bahrain's geopolitical and economic importance to a lot of countries, I like to call it the inconvenient revolution. Because it's inconvenient to the Arab countries, it's inconvenient to the West. You're looking at a situation where, unfortunately, living in the 21st century, a barrel of oil coming from Saudi Arabia is still more valuable than human lives in Bahrain. And for the United States, Bahrain is really the case that put them to the test. It was really the case where they had to choose between what they call their values and principles, human rights and democracy, and their interests geopolitically and economically. And unfortunately, so far, they have pretty much put up with the double standards of choosing their economical interests and geopolitical interests over what they call their principles and values.
So the reason I asked you that is because a lot of people have been covering Bahrain sporadically in the press, and NPR recently covered it. And in it, I want to read you an excerpt from what they wrote. In Bahrain, the wall of fear hasn't been broken. People realize they have a lot to lose. There is no large movement, as was the case back in February and March. And from what a lot of people say, there's not going to be one anytime soon. For now, the uprising appears to be over. Is the uprising over?
Definitely not. I mean, we're looking at a situation where since the 14th of February, 2011, the protests in Bahrain have not stopped. Every single day people come out, almost every single day.
Well, we have some video, I believe, that you pointed us to that was when? Taken in November?
The 9th of November.
Can we roll that clip? And Maryam, maybe you could speak to it.
Sure.
So what is this?
So what you're looking at here is just merely about a month ago, people were walking to Friday prayers where they were going to, people were going to Friday prayers. And it wasn't even a protest. People were just going to Friday prayers. A young boy was killed when he was chased by riot police into the highway and run over by a car. And here you can see the very typical behavior of security forces in Bahrain, who are largely non-Bahraini. And this is what happens. When people get caught, they get beaten, they get spat on, and then they get arrested. And then for sometimes for days, we don't even know where they are. They sometimes get taken to unofficial torture centers where they are tortured. And sometimes even in the police stations, they continue to be tortured. And this is a daily thing in Bahrain almost, where the protests still continue.
Throughout the uprisings,